Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. So it occurred to me while we were chanting how much we're attached to worrying. Not a new thought, but what is our fear about not worrying? Like if we consider giving up worrying about things, we feel fear. What is that fear? It's the fear of being punished for not doing the right thing. That if we don't make the right decision or choose the right course of action or say the right thing, all the things that we worry about, take the right job, move the right place, do this, do that. And we fear that if we make a bad choice or what we think of as a bad choice, that we're going to be punished. And so it's very difficult to just sit and be in the liveliness of things without having something to grab onto to reassure ourselves that we're not going to be punished or to reassure ourselves that we're being good. And of course, all of this comes from the Abrahamic traditions where God is punishing and where God operates on an axis of reward and punishment. And this is very, very different from the traditions that we practice in. Very, very different. If you read the Mahabharata, for instance, as we were doing as a community for a couple of years, you realize that even when God, in the form of Krishna, it happens in the Mahabharata, even when God sounds like he's being punishing, he's actually just laughing behind his sleeve. He's not really taking any of it all that seriously. One of the phrases that's often applied to Krishna in the Mahabharata is his mocking smile. And what is Krishna mocking? Krishna's mocking all the machinations that we go through, all the ways in which we have bought into this idea that we have to do things this one way and we can't do them another way. There's many branching decision chains in the Mahabharata where somebody or another is challenged to either follow the instruction of the guru or to follow their own mental machination. And at certain very critical junctures, what these supposed devotees do is follow their own mental machinations. And then they get Krishna's mocking smile. They don't get Krishna's punishment. They don't get Krishna's yelling at them and telling them they're evil and bad. They get a mocking smile. Part of this mocking smile is a knowing smile, because Krishna knows that even if you disobey, for instance, some conventional rule, very, very often in the Mahabharata, it's usually the disciple of a guru, and that disciple is usually like a warrior or a king or something like that, somebody in some position of authority. And they're usually very, very attached to dharma, to their idea of duty, their idea of, conventional rightness. And so they actually disobey Krishna in order to follow their idea of dharma. If you can imagine. And then, of course, Krishna's mocking smile is this understanding of what is now going to ensue. That if these characters had simply followed the guru without any mental machinations, they would have cleared out a whole bunch of complications and karma in a moment. But because they insisted on their limited understanding of duty, and because they insisted on their idea of there's this absolute right and absolute wrong, they don't understand, like Krishna does, that right and wrong are fluid, and that they're circumstantial, and that there's always an openness in every situation that might actually demand that you do something that would be inappropriate in another situation. Krishna knows all this, and he sees the disciples sort of toddling off on their much longer path than they would have gone on if they had just listened. Sometimes the guru was a different character too, but these are all very crucial moments in the Mahabharata that push the story along. In other words, if the people involved, the disciples, had just followed Guru or Krishna, God in the form of Guru, the story would have been over. But, it wouldn't have been 12 volumes, 10,000 verses, or whatever it was. We wouldn't have the Mahabharata as we know it today, but we might not need it, actually. So we're all doing that all the time. In the Mahabharata, the fear of going against dharma has more to do with I made a promise. Some of these characters will say, I made a promise. I took a vow. I promised this person I would do something. I made a vow that I would never marry or never do this or never do that. It wasn't really about, I don't want to make a mistake. I mean, it's a very, very different world and a different set of gods. Right? So nobody ever said, I'm afraid to make a mistake because then I'll be evil and bad. As a matter of fact, there's lots of evil characters who don't think they're evil at all and who always can find redemption in an instant. You know, one moment of doing something generous or kind clears lifetimes of heinous behavior, seemingly. So there's never that, Christian sense of when you go to hell, you'll be there forever. You can't get out. You can't find redemption once you've crossed a certain line, which is what the Judeo-Christian traditions tell us. So this constant worry that we're attached to, we don't want to stop worrying because that might mean that we'll make some horrible mistake. And worry is a way of sort of holding back the reins of punishment or holding on to the reins, trying to control what happens so that we don't get doomed in some way, which usually remains indefinable. Just sort of this lurking sense of doom, overhanging sense of doom. Right.
So I'm just wondering, where is the shame connected to the punishment and what you're talking about?
Those stories, those Puranas, are talking about how people really feel. So there is literally a sense of dishonor. I think it'd be useful to talk about our modern ideas of shame versus this idea of dishonor. We have this idea of personal shame, like that there's something deeply wrong that we should keep hidden because it's ooey. And it's very individualistic and it seems more neurotic in some sense. Whereas if you have this idea of honor and you've lost your honor, I think Sita's shame is around her honor and the questioning of her honor more than it is I feel like a terrible person individually. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's that. But I think it's also the societal consequence as well. But I wonder about the individual ooey feeling and then the internalizing of society's judgment.
I haven't read the Ramayana in a lot of years, so I don't really remember the fine-grained emotions around what people are experiencing. And the Mahabharata is just fresher in my mind. But the internalized condemnation of a Titan culture that says you should not make a mistake. You must always be successful. You should always be improving. You should be measuring up to this bar. And it's all about accomplishment. In the Mahabharata, it's more about maintaining one's samaya, keeping a promise to society at large. To your community. It's not just some personal thing I'm not going to eat chocolate for a week, but it's something much more important, right? And it does involve much more about community, where it seems like our sense of shame is about not measuring up in the competition of life. What do other people think?
Yeah.
Who's the first guy who promises never to have sex, never to marry? Who's that first guy?
Is that Bhima?
Bhishma, right. You can't imagine Bhishma saying, so what do you think of my vow? Do you like it?
Did I do it right?
It has a very different flavor, right?
And he's like, I'm going to die on a bed of arrows.
Yeah.
Take it to the next level.
Whereas we would just crawl into our room and
into fetal position.
Right? It's quite a different kind of a feeling of shame. Right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even call what Bhishma feels shame.
No.
It's just sort of this insistence. And then the sense of failure, when Yudhishthira loses his whole family, he hardly expresses any regret. It's just there's a moment. There's a moment of regret. Yudhishthira is the sort of main king on the more enlightened side of the family, and he has a gambling problem, so he gambles away his entire family. And he does express some regret, but it's certainly not really commensurate with what he did.
And it doesn't really stick around. He doesn't talk about it.
Yeah, there's this sense in non-Abrahamic cultures that everything can be renewed. Everything can have another start. And that's certainly my experience as a practitioner, and especially as someone who does divination. that there is always, always, always the opportunity for a fresh start. And that fresh start is always brought on by some renewed access to honesty and sincerity and modesty, those three.
That seems also related to knowing that we've had many lives. Like in Abrahamic traditions, you have this one life that's so precious, and if you fuck up, then you go to hell. But in this tradition, knowing that we've made zillions of mistakes and we've gone off the rails and found our way back, and that it's all playing out over this much bigger, kind of longer time span, that feels relaxing.
Yeah.
Thinking about Bhishma too, I think it seems related to what you were talking about with like devotion kind of turning into something else in traditions as they go on. And especially in that story, like it does seem like, there's this sort of codified dharma in scripture that people are trying to live up to or make vows around or whatever. But then there's like the actual living Krishnas there. And it's interesting how somebody could like stick to a vow in front of God, like if they think they're acting dharmically. It feels like there's a difference between like the structure of a religion and like the devotion to like a living actual guru, like in your life.
Very different, because there's just, you're basically relating to the representative of the impossible can become possible, and the possible can become impossible, right? So you're relating to the representative of anything goes.
In the Guru context?
The brand, the brand is anything goes. The brand of God, because God is God, right?
Seems like that's why Yudhishthira didn't express any remorse either, because he was just convinced that following his idea of Dharma.
And he's continually referred to as the most dharmically wonderful character in the whole, despite the fact that he's a gambling addict. So there's that sense of like spaciousness and mercy and forgiveness, and like you can have these terrible flaws but still be the most dharmic character in the whole story.
I have just one clarification about Yudhishthira. In terms of Yudhishthira's and the entire Pandavas, talking about, now we really have to fulfill our dharma because this is the karma that we have to work through.
Well, I think, some people's idea of how to, rectify some kind of karma is to behave in a very dharmic way, whatever they think that is.
Yeah.
But, more Vedic teachings, which I think that Krishna is representing that. There is nothing that gets rid of karma faster than following your teacher. Or, if your teacher happens to be Krishna, of course, like 10,000 times that, right? So basically the teachings from the Vedas and the Tantras are that all bets are off. If you're following your teacher, none of those rules apply, and that whatever your teacher says is the thing that's going to resolve your karma faster than anything else. It is the fast path. So what you're seeing in the Mahabharata is people choosing the slow path, right? It's still a path. It still will, they'll eventually have more wisdom and wake up more, but it'll just take a lot longer. It's like when Krishna goes and tries to convince them not to fight the war. And they're all like, no, we have to do it. And so then what does he do? This is very typical. Then he urges them to fight it. Of course, we have the Bhagavad Gita, where he just spends a lot of time telling Arjuna that he has to fight this war.
Right.
Because the die has already been cast. And this actually happened to me. I wrote about this in Pilgrims to Openness, where I was in Varanasi. It was the first time I'd ever been there. And I had planned to do this practice called Purusharana, which is when you do 100,000 mantras in 10 days of some particular mantra you're like making friends with. So I was going to do this in Varanasi because, I had to do it there because that would make it better. And I went to see one of my teachers and he said, you don't have to do that. And I was like, yes, I do. And he's like, no, you really don't. And then he said, okay, just do 7,000 mantras, not 100,000. I was like, no, I have to do 100,000. And then I said, I told my teacher back in the States I was going to do this. And he was like, oh, okay. But, really, I had made the whole thing up. It wasn't like my teacher came to me and said, do this. I said, I want to do this. It's an ancient practice and I want to do it the ancient way and blah, blah, blah. So after I refused to not do it, this teacher said, okay, I'll help you. And he said, I'm going to organize the whole fire ceremony. At the end of it, I'll get everyone together. Everything will be great. So that's what Krishna does, right? If you don't follow the instructions, then God/guru helps you do the ridiculous thing you wanted to do.
He would be the chauffeur to your chariot.
Exactly. So this is the thing. There's a saying in the Shakti Tantric traditions, the Divine Mother will give you whatever you insist on. So be careful what you insist on. I mean, and the idea is it's all leading to the same place eventually, but it's sort of like, do you want to have to bottom out first, or do you want to go the short path? Which way do you want to go? So then, after I insisted, I started the practice, and I got dengue fever on the first day.
Oh.
I was sick the whole rest of the time I was in India. I couldn't finish the practice. And then I went home, and I did it at home, but I did it in a much more leisurely way. And so I had to bottom out first. I had to get really, really sick. And I was coughing for 6 months and crazy spots all over my face. So it is true that everything is made of wisdom. And wisdom's going to, if you're even a little aware, it's going to offer you some shorter ways to do stuff. But then even if you're not, or you see it, but you don't, you're like, no. Wisdom's still helping you. Right? So there really actually isn't any such thing as a mistake. In an absolute sense, there are no mistakes. There are no non-mistakes either. I mean, it's not like there's no mistakes, so everything's right. You're right all the time. That's not what that means. It means that everything is just that all the time. But it's very hard to let go of that thing of, I want to do the right thing.
Can you talk about sincerity in relation to that? How that fits in?
Sincerity, it fits in everywhere. Because when you're being sincere, you're not lying to yourself. You're not hiding from yourself or from a circumstance. I mean, whatever you're doing when you're being sincere is your utmost.
And that could be mistakes in there.
That could include lots of mistakes.
Okay.
I mean, imagine if any of us were trying to learn how to do ballet. Maybe you would be okay with it, but the rest of us would be making horrible mistakes every 5 seconds, if not every 1 second. But a sincere effort is rewarded with what? Accomplishment. Right. Over time. An insincere effort is rewarded with what? Nothing, really. It's just fake. You can't be a fake ballet dancer. It really is not a thing. You can't be a fake spiritual practitioner either. You can be a person pretending to be spiritual or pretending to do practice, but you literally cannot be a fake spiritual practitioner. There is no such thing. It's only in those moments that you're being sincere that you're really doing it. And we have lots of stuff that gets in the way, of course. But when we have those moments of letting all that stuff down and being just sincere, where we are honest and modest, that's where everything comes from.